Alrighty, we're live. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I've been away for a while. You know how the holidays are, spending time with family and my wife and stuff like that, and just enjoying life. And back to the normal schedule and stuff. So I'm home today. I'll be back at work tomorrow. So, but as promised, by a lot of to a lot of people, gonna be redoing the tuning stream, because I'm a goof and I forgot that VODs delete themselves after 2 weeks, and I never exported the video. So doing another one for you guys. Then I'm gonna actually make sure I remember to export this one so it doesn't get lost in another world of Twitch. So let me go jump in a different car really quick, because this is a little experiment that I'm working on that I'll discuss at the end of the stream. Alright, I understand. So I'm just gonna try and jump into this one. I'm gonna try and I'm gonna pray I can keep this one under an hour. I was a little long-winded last time, so gonna try and just keep this straight to the point, short and simple. I can get into details with people later on if they have questions for me. Just gonna go block by block and just explain each thing in CarX terms, and then explain some personal experience with them and some real world knowledge that can be tied with them. So first thing right off the rip, spring length, pretty self-explanatory, is the length of the spring on the car. Jumping straight into real world stuff, when you have coilovers in real life, it is not hardly a thing anymore to have your ride height adjusted with the preload of the spring, is the proper term for it. In real life is what would happen. On this game, they have it tied together, so it kind of sucks a little bit. Good morning, Ninja. It kind of sucks a little bit. When you adjust the spring length on this game, you're adjusting the ride height, but at the same time, you're also adjusting the amount of suspension travel that you get as well. So all of you hot boys driving around, something like this, where I replicated my real car, I don't have the greatest amount of suspension travel in this car, so it's going to ride rough, it's going to hit bumps hard, it's going to bounce a little bit, and it's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel ideal, I guess, if you want to call it that. So best rules and stuff like that, definitely try and not be tucking tire, not having the frame of the car a couple inches off the ground, stuff like that. Just a reasonable ride height. You can visualize it, you can see it yourself. Obviously when you go and test drive the car, you'll be able to feel the suspension travel. The higher you go in number and spring length on the game, the more travel you're going to feel out of the car. This is going to give you more mechanical grip out of the suspension, but it's also going to give you a little bit more room for error, or not. It's going to take away some room for error, as far as how much the suspension can unload in certain situations and stuff like that. So you really have to focus on staying in control of your suspension, especially if you run softer spring rates and stuff like that, like some people like to do for their driving style. Depends on the car that I'm doing. So yeah, spring length, adjusts ride height, but it also adjusts the suspension travel of the car. So keep that in mind when you're making cars. Next thing, spring stiffness. Again, straightforward. This is how stiff the spring is on the suspension on your car. Each car has its own ideal spring rates that it likes. In this game, if you ever hear me talk to you personally or on a Facebook group or anything like that, and I say like 6K, 10K, 8K, 14K, whatever, stuff like that, that translates directly to this game. Just take the 0 off the end of it, and you can translate it to how spring rates are referred to in real life in metric terms. They directly translate to standard measurements for us weird American people that never got on the metric system like we should have. But that's a whole. Um, so on this car that you're looking at, my real car, I have Neo Motorsport coilovers. They have a 10K, 8K spring setup, so I got a 10K, 8K rear spring. Spring rate, there's things that, and I'm praying that my stream isn't cutting out right now. I'm gonna get very irritated if it is. Give me 1 second. I think we're okay at the moment. Um, what was that? Spring rates. So your spring rates is what you are going to use to adjust your ride quality. So how soft or harsh the ride quality is, how much compression you want to get in a certain amount of time, how much decompression you want to get. A little bit that's going to be adjusted with shocks too as well, but your spring rates are going to determine that as well. The main thing with spring rates is going to be your ride quality and making sure that you get the weight of the vehicle balanced well, while also trying to get a certain amount of mechanical grip out of the car that you want. So each car has its own baseline spring rates in real life when you get coilovers for them. An S13 is going to have completely different spring rates from a Mustang. Standard spring rates, for example, for an S13 are 8K, 6K, or in this game, they're 80K front, 60K rear. Obviously, those get played with a lot. People have different preferences for spring rates, how stiff they want the front versus how soft they want the rear, how they want the car to drive. There's a fine tuning with spring rates, and it's something that it's one of those things I encourage people to go play with it. It might be, say you set your base spring rates at 14K front, 9K rear on a JZX 100 or something like that. It's a big heavy car. It's got a lot of front weight distribution, so it's going to have a bit heavier spring in the front than it is in the rear. Say you're taking some laps, getting your test driving in, and it feels like the back of the car is a little heavy, and when you're transitioning, you're kind of struggling a little bit to engage your transition, and then as you're transitioning through, it feels like the back of the car is kind of just carrying itself around. It might be that you want to throw a stiffer spring rate on the rear, so you might want to go from a 14.9 to a 14.10 or a 14.11 or maybe a 14.12. And then obviously you want to adjust your shocks accordingly for that, because your shocks and your spring rates tie together. It's one of those things, when you adjust one, you need to drive it, make sure you don't need to adjust the other. So again, spring stiffness, it's pretty straightforward. Setting up for most cars, you're gonna have a stiffer spring in the front than the rear. Stiffer spring in the front than the rear. If I can talk right this morning, sorry it's early. Solely because of our cars being front engine, rear wheel drive, standard for all drift cars. So you're gonna have a heavier spring in the front than the rear. If you go throw in a 6K spring on the front and a 10K spring on the rear, it's going to make the rear of the car really light. It's going to rotate super easy, and it's not probably going to be enjoyable, and it's going to feel pretty out of control, and you're going to have to fight the car, and that's not what you want when you're setting up a drift car. Drift cars are supposed to be easy to drive when they are set up properly. So that's something you want to keep in mind. If you're having to struggle with your car, if you're having to fight your car, something's not right with it. Keep messing with it. Ask around. Get a hold of me, get a hold of somebody else that's experienced with tuning, and we'll help you out and get you figured out and figure out what's going on and why you're having to fight your car so much. So, jump over to shock stiffness. Now, two things I want to go over. One, the base shock stiffness that's on the game right now. This is a one-way damper, as in you are adjusting how fast or slow your shocks are going to respond to compression only. That's it. Decompression is 1 baseline amount from what I can tell. Now, on this game, they might be tied together, and it might be when you make it 40%, it might be that, it's a softer shock compressing and decompressing. Very well could be a thing. I've tried to kind of pay attention to it. Sometimes it feels like it adjusts both compression and decompression. Sometimes it feels like it just adjusts the compression. In real world terms, the way that it is on the game right now, this is a one-way damper. It should only be the compression. But, CarX is still working on their game. Not everything's perfect. Not everything's as detailed. But in the next update, whenever it comes out for you PC people, if you've played the PTR version, you have seen the wonderful four-way damper adjustment that they've put on the game. Four-way dampers, I can get into it really quick. It's super easy to explain. Four-way dampers gives you your standard compression and decompression separately. Plus, it gives you your fast compression and fast decompression. That's going to be how your shocks react to bumps, dips, cracks, little instances where your suspension is going to be reacting to it as you're driving, things like that, versus your regular compression and decompression, which is going to be adjusting for big weight changes, big dips in the road, big humps that you might be driving over, big inconsistencies in your road service, stuff like that. So those four-way dampers that they're bringing along, it's going to add a whole other layer of tuning to the suspension that's really going to let us get our cars super duper dialed in and really smooth, really responsive, but really settled and stable at the same time. So it's going to be really nice. Makes a tuning nerd like me super happy that they're getting in detail and doing four-way dampers, because that's something that not even Forza or anybody has. So I'm hoping that they do it justice and that it works well. From what I've seen, the adjustments are really, really fine-tuned and detailed, which are not super realistic, because obviously when you adjust dampers in real life, you just have knobs that you can turn that adjust the amount of pressure in the shock, or in the reservoir that's mounted away from the shock, if you're running like 3 and 4-way dampers. So jumping back into this, as it sits right now, shock stiffness, this is just going to adjust how hard or soft your shocks are. So if you have a lower percentage on your shocks, you're going to get more compression and decompression easier as your suspension reacts to loading and unloading the suspension, whether it's by you as you're driving or through the road surface. So as you go up in shock stiffness, it's going to be a harder reaction, and it's going to react slower, is the best way to put it. Softer shock, faster reaction, harder shock, slower reaction, is the best way to keep it in mind when you're tuning, so you can kind of visualize what's happening. Like I said before, your springs and your shocks, they play into each other. So you want to find that balance of not running too soft of a spring that you have to run your shocks maxed out. You never want to run your shocks maxed out. You always want that tunability and that adjustment. Same way in real life too. You want springs so soft on your car that to get it to feel good, you got to turn your shocks all the way up to make it, ride stiff, ride responsive, like you might need it to for certain road surfaces, track surfaces, or just to fit your driving style. So you want to get into playing with the spring rates. I'm getting back on CarX here. You want to make sure you play with your spring rates and get your spring rates to feel comfortable to where you can float around that middle point of like 30 to 70%. So you can float around in that area, and then if you need to, like say for a certain track, bump your shock way up, or you need to make like the ass of the car stiffer, then bring the spring rate up so that you can still have that shock stiffness to play with to account for road surface imperfections and things like that, to make sure that your suspension isn't just like hitting a bump in the road and the back of the car is so hard with your shock setting that it's not compressing when you need it to, and it's just kind of bouncing off of that bump, and you're just kind of losing control of the car for a second. You want to make sure that you can stay, lower down in your shock stiffness so that you can make sure and account for those imperfections in the road so that your suspension can just hit them and compress and decompress, and it's not shocking your car, it's not shocking your steering inputs, it's not upsetting your vehicle. You want to make sure that you're hitting those bumps and you're just kind of floating over them as much as you can so that you can stay stable, you can stay in throttle, you can stay in lock, you can keep that speed up, and you can stay smooth for the people that are behind you if you're leading. So yeah, that's shock stiffness. Toe, really straightforward. Again, after I explain it, negative toe is the front of your wheel and tire setup pointed out. So the more negative toe, the more front, or the more outwards that the front of the tire is going to move. Positive is it pointing in from neutral. With drifting, you're going to want some negative toe in the front. Front end, stay ahead of the rear of the car, especially under transitions. On the back half of the transition, say you run zero toe, front and rear, you have your suspension set up well, you've got a good base on your suspension, and it seems like every time you're transitioning, you're having trouble with your rear of the car kind of over rotating a little bit, and your front end is just kind of not keeping up with it. Your self steer is, it's there, but it's a little slow. And by the time you're getting to a point where you're self steering to the point that you need to be in the drift that you want to, your rear is already ahead of your car and you're spinning. The negative toe is going to help with that. Standard negative toe for when you're setting up a drift car is somewhere between negative 0.3 and 0.6. There are realms, especially over in Japan, that they've started delving into, that they're getting into like -1, -1.5 degrees of toe out in the front. I prefer it. It just fits my driving style. Not something that you have to do. Some people don't like to run any toe. It all depends on your driving style and how you want the car to feel and how the car does feel to you. So this isn't one of those things where I'm going to tell you to set your car up a certain way and that's the only way you can do it. Everybody's driving style is different and everybody likes their car to feel a certain way. So I always encourage people to play with the tuning. I'm just here to explain what it does. So, toe. Negative is pointed out in the front. Positive, pointed in. I don't recommend positive toe for drifting. I'll say that right now. I would not do it. It's going to not feel proper and ideal. So yeah, play with negative toe. Put it all the way up to 1, see how it feels. Put it down to 0.5, see how it feels. Put it at 0. Kind of jump around in the bigger margins so you can get a taste of what it feels like when it changes, and then play from there. Rear toe, a little bit of the opposite. Just a quick recommendation. I recommend running somewhere between 0 and 0.5 positive. That is going to be toe in. When you run toe in, it's going to give you more bite, and it's going to give you a theoretically wider contact patch on the ground, because the front of the tire is pointing in, so your tire that's touching the ground is going to be at a little bit of an angle, so it's giving you a theoretically slightly wider tire contact patch. And on top of that, it's going to help your car to want to bite forward instead of to the side. So like say if you were to put negative toe on the rear, it's going to point your rear tires out, and it's going to encourage that leading tire in the rear that's loaded the most. It's going to kind of encourage the car to want to rotate, and that's not what you want. You want to find a balance of forward bite and side bite when you're drifting. So I recommend somewhere between 0 and 0.5. You can obviously play with it. If you want to put it all the way up to 1, go for it. But I will say you'll lose forward speed as far as when you're driving straight. So if you're in comp and you're needing to launch off the line and make sure the guy isn't gapping you off the line and stuff like that, I might not recommend running rear toe because you're going to lose some. Sorry, I got a text message. you're going to lose speed as you're rolling forward because you're going to get resistance from that tire not being rolling from that tire not rolling straight forward. It's going to be rolling at a little bit of an angle, so you're going to lose some speed and you're going to get the resistance out of it. So find a balance. Camber, it's like toe, but it's top of the tire. It's going to adjust how much the top of the wheel and tire point in or out. With drifting, with driving in general, negative camber is always what you're going to see. It's either going to be, if you're driving around with a regular vehicle like a truck and stuff like that, you're not going to have camber and stuff on it. It's going to be flat. When you have a daily road car, the ideal is to keep the tire rolling as straight and as flat as possible to get the most life out of the tires and to give the most ideal ride quality just out of something that you're driving around on the road. With drifting, obviously that goes out the window because most of your time is going to be spent moving to the side and not moving forward. So camber is one of those things, again, where you have to find a balance with, and you have to find what you like, and it's going to tie together with the rest of the way that you have your alignment set up. This car, I have -6.5. It's just because I was replicating my real car. A little bit more than I prefer to run. I usually float around in between the -4 and -5 realm. Biggest things to keep in mind, as you add negative camber, you are going to lose tire feel and tire response in the midsections of your transitions and when you're driving straight ahead, not in drift, because you're going to have very little contact patch on the ground. So it's going to make your steering lighter, and it's going to make your car feel like it's more prone to understeer in the front. So there's a balance that you want to find with your camber. Like I said, I run in between like -4 and -5. It depends on the car. It depends on how much rake I have, so how much I have the rear of the car squatted, because that's going to change the dynamic positive camber gain that you're going to get in drift, because it's going to be, the whole vehicle is going to be leaning back, so it's going to be leaning that front lead wheel back as well. So it might, I might run a little bit more negative camber to counteract that if I have a softer rear or if I have more rake, depending on how I have the car set up to how I like it. But a good baseline to play with that I recommend people try is somewhere between -2.5 and -5. Start with the lower end. If you're in drift and it feels like you're going around a turn and your front end's kind of washing out, or as you increase your vehicle angle in drift and it feels like you're all of a sudden your front end's just kind of washing out and your rear's just rotating around and you're losing that response, try and add some camber to it. It's probably because you are leaning too far positive, so you're losing your contact patch in the front. So your rear is then going to run away from the front of your car because your grip coefficient between the front and the rear is going to increase, and your front's going to decrease, your rear's going to increase, and your rear is going to then run away from the front of your car. That's not what you want, because you're going to be fighting your car at that point. I'm going to jump to caster because these play together with each other. For most of my comp cars that I have set up, I'm running somewhere around 6 degrees of caster. The thing to keep in mind with doing caster, this is going to, one, change how much dynamic camber change happens through the steering sweep. So the higher your caster is, the more positive camber gain you're going to roll into with your lead wheel, and then your trailing wheel is going to be more negative, to the point that you can see it like this on this car. That tire is maybe 30% touching the road. And again, it's how I have my car set up in real life. It's not the most ideal thing, but it's what I have to do to make it work. So I float around 6 degrees of caster. It keeps a nice balance of good self-steer. I get a good amount of camber change as I roll through my steering sweep, but it's not so much that, my trailing tire is just, barely touching the ground. So I'm keeping a good amount of contact patch on the leading wheel and the trailing wheel to make sure I keep a good amount of grip and response. And then on top of that, it keeps my camber from just dynamically changing to extremes as I'm going through transitions, so it keeps my grip and my tire feel and my tire feedback more consistent as I transition. That's one of those things that, it's going to pair with your camber, so you got to play with it. So like I said, front camber, playing between -2.5 and -5. Caster, I float around 6. You can go lower, you can go higher, whatever feels best to you. I wouldn't recommend, going down to 0, 1, 2, stuff like that. You're going to start losing some self-steer, and, on top of that, I try to tune as realistic as possible so that it can translate to real-world terms to the best of my abilities, so I recommend people do that as well. So, normal caster angles you're going to see is somewhere between 4 and 10. Some cars have even more than that. My IS250 has like 9.5 degrees of camber from the factory. Last time I checked, it was either 8.5 or 9.5 degrees, which I thought was wild. But it's how Toyota set the car up and set the suspension geometry up, so that's fine with me. I think my 240 has like 10 or 11 degrees of caster. I did 8.5 on here because 10 just felt terrible. And plus, that stuff's going to be getting changed as I get that car put back together and get it back on the ground and driving again. Let me talk about rear camber real quick, then we're going to take a break and take a drink real quick and answer these messages. Rear camber, it's a super straightforward thing. You want to try and keep that tire as flat as possible on the ground. I have -2 on this car in real life, so don't take this as an example. Most of my competition cars are around -0.5 to compensate for the tire rolling under as you're in drift. So you want to try and find that happy balance there. But the one thing you want to keep in mind is keeping that tire flat on the ground when you're in drift, when your suspension's loaded, when your tire is rolling under, to get the most possible grip out of the rear of your car. Not just so you can drive fast, but to make sure that you are using the tire that you have under the car to make sure that you're getting every ounce of potential out of the car that you can. So yeah, around -0.5 is what I've noticed kind of feels the best to me. You can play with it. Obviously, if you're wanting to make some, hot boy car and you're wanting to run, some negative camber and stuff like that, like I have this one on a stock body S13, that's fine. It's not a sin. I'm not going to shame you. No one's, I hope no one shames you. I know some people will. But yeah, so there's that. Let me take a drink real quick. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay. I felt like there was something I left out with the with talking about the camber, but it's kind of escaping me right now. So if like I said, if people have questions, obviously ask me about it later on. I'm more than happy to answer them. I know I've helped a lot of people or tried to as much as I can. So jump back into this. Roll bars. Not going to spend a lot of time on roll bars because it's really straightforward. Roll bars is what ties your driver and passenger side suspension together. The softer you have it, the more differentiation you get between the driver and passenger side. So, most road-going cars, they don't have super stiff sway bars. They have a lot of body rollover. That helps keep the unloaded tire able to flex and stay on the ground so that you're not picking up that tire. If you have, a lot of suspension travel and you run a really stiff sway bar, just to give you an example, as you lean in to whichever side is getting loaded, that opposite side, that sway bar is going to be so stiff and it's not going to flex. It's going to actually pick that tire up off the ground. So a lot of people saw that 2 or 3 years ago, I think, with the RTR Mustangs. They were notorious for three-wheeling. It's how those cars are set up. It would getting into how they set their cars up and how some of those pro cars are set up as a totally different ball game, and it's a lot of technicalities. It's stuff that I enjoy, stuff that I'd love to explain to people one-on-one if they want to know about it. But those guys are squeezing every single little ounce of grip and tire response and suspension travel and just every little ounce of potential they can get out of those cars, and it is truly fascinating as far as the engineering that's gone into the drifting aspect of building suspension components and stuff like that for those cars. And the amount of lock that they have, they're running like 70 plus degrees of lock, which was unheard of 10 years ago when drifting was getting into its infancy. I think we're like 17 years into Formula D now, and even years into Formula D, that just wasn't a thing. You saw like 50, 55 degrees of lock, and not a lot of horsepower and stuff like that. So but yeah, sway bars, it's something that just ties your driver and passenger side together. The stiffer it is, the less flex you have, so it's gonna keep the car more neutral. But if you have more ride height and you have a softer suspension, if you're building like a comp car or something like that, keep in mind that you don't want to run it too stiff. You might run the potential of picking up that trailing wheel in the front, and you're going to lose that grip and that contact batch on one half of your front end that you are going to feel. Even though it's not the loaded side of the car, you're still getting that feedback from the front end of the car. The rear roll bars, this is something that you're just going to use as an adjustment to keep the rear end intact as you're transitioning weight side to side. There's a happy balance, as there is with everything else, and depending on how the rest of the car is set up. So just keep that in mind. Again, sway bars, softer they are, the more flex you get, the more body roll transition you're going to feel in the car versus the car staying neutral side to side. So again, find that balance. One thing that I'm going to get into in detail is Ackerman. Ackerman is something that not a lot of people are accustomed to. Something that not a lot of people are knowledgeable of, and that's no offense to people. Ackerman is something that isn't a standard suspension setting that you get to play with cars. Even if you work on cars in real life, if you're not building drift cars or building race cars or something like that, you're not getting into setting Ackerman, because you can't adjust it unless you have a suspension kit that allows you to adjust Ackerman. In simplest terms, is the variance between the driver's side and passenger side wheel as it moves through its steering arc. So in this game, 100% Ackerman is 0 degrees of Ackerman in real life. This is what gets talked about a lot as far as how you should set it up, how you shouldn't set it up, what is realistic, what isn't. 0 degrees of Ackerman, just to give you an idea right off the bat, is what you're going to see out of a lot of angle kits for drifting in real life. Degrees of Ackerman, or 100%, is both of those front wheels when at lock at the same amount of lock. So if you have 60 degrees of lock in your kit, or if you have 60 degrees of lock on the car in the game, and you put it at 100% or 0 degrees, that means that your passenger side and your driver's side are both at 60 degrees of lock. This is ideal for drifting because of the motion that your car is moving in. Depending on the arc of the turn and how much vehicle angle and stuff you have, there's some times where your driver and passenger side tires are going to be moving almost in the same arc with each other, which isn't a thing in real life. It isn't a thing in real life, like driving terms, like just driving on a normal road, driving straight, driving around town. That's not something that you're going to have, is your driver and passenger side tires traveling almost in the same arc around a turn. And it's just because you're in a different nature. Um, when you're driving straight ahead and you're going through a turn, your inside tire is going to naturally have a smaller arc than your outside tire. So, standard cars, standard suspensions that come on cars straight out of the factory, they are going to have degrees of Ackerman set in them to compensate for that, to make sure that one tire isn't dragging and chewing up that tire, and again, to make sure that you get proper tire longevity and to make sure that the ride quality is nice. Because if you start dragging, that tire might start skipping, and you're going to feel that, and it's not going to feel good for somebody that is just wanting to drive around town in a normal car. So, difference with drifting is you're getting the most potential you can out of those front tires, and you want to make sure that you have consistent response, and you want to make sure you're not dragging that trailing tire. And as you come down off of 100% or off of 0 degrees of Ackerman, you're going to, in certain instances, start dragging that trailing tire. So I stay in between like 65, 70% up to 100%, depending on how I'm setting the car up and what track I'm setting the car up for. If you are running a smaller, tighter track where you're going to be able to throw a little bit more angle and your arcs aren't going to be as wide, you can run more Ackerman to keep the driver and passenger side more neutral, to keep the response more consistent, and to try and keep that trailing wheel from dragging as much as you can. Whereas if you are running a bigger, more open track, you might be running shallower on vehicle angles, stuff like that. You might want to come down on the Ackerman and add a few degrees of Ackerman a little bit to make sure that that trailing tire that's actually going to be traveling on a smaller turn arc is not dragging and it's staying flat and rolling straight in its arc that it's traveling in. So again, it's something that is it's a track to track basis, a layout to layout basis, but you can get a decent baseline that you can just run on every track. That's it's going to feel good, it's going to feel consistent. Like I said, I stay between like 65 and 100% depending on how I'm setting the car up and what I'm setting the car up for, as far as track wise. I also have to use it with certain cars like the Mustang that only gets like 56 degrees of steering lock. I run the Ackerman lower on it to get more steering lock to compensate that lack of lock that the game gives us in that car. I think I have my Mustang at like 70%, so I could estimate like maybe 65 degrees of lock on that front wheel, but adversely, I'm only running probably like 48 to 50 degrees of lock on the trailing wheel because I have it at 70% and not 100%. So make sacrifices, but pays off. From what I've seen from trailing cams, I'm not dragging that wheel too bad unless I'm throwing like a lot of angle into a turn, but I try and use that to my advantage with that trailing wheel dragging, to kind of slow the car down and to help the front end pull back. And then at the same time, I'll use the rear side bite that I have tuned into the car to kind of get it to rotate around those smaller turns if I'm trying to decelerate, but stay on throttle as much as I can and keep that suspension dug into the ground and keep the car settled and not, try and upset the car and, pull on my e-brake and stuff like that, and, try and maintain as much momentum and speed as I can through the layout. Moving on to steering angle, it's a straightforward thing. It's just how much lock you get out of the front of the car. Not a whole lot to explain with that. Wheels. Really straightforward. Your rim diameter. Wheel diameter. I hate that they call it a rim in this game. It's not a rim, it's a wheel. It's two different things. Your wheel diameter. It's how big your wheel is. Hurrah. Um, there's some competitions and stuff that they'll specify what you can and can't run as far as wheel diameter and tire diameter and stuff like that. It's something I'm working on right now with a teammate of mine that's putting a comp together. We have an overall diameter restriction that you can't go above. So if you want to run a certain height tire, you have to come down to make up for that. For the most part, wheel diameter is just personal preference, so everybody knows what that is. Again, straightforward. That's how wide the tire is. For the most part, you're going to be running a smaller front tire than a rear tire. If you're running a bigger front tire than a rear tire, you're probably driving like a 100 horsepower little beater car, and you're trying to just encourage the rear of the car to rotate as much as possible because you don't have that power to push the rear out. But typically you're going to be running a bigger tire to get grip out of the rear to make up for the lack of grip that you're going to have with the tire spinning. So that's what you're normally going to see is a few millimeters, few 10, 20 millimeters smaller in the front than the rear. Some people run a square. I think I have a square tire set up on a couple cars just because it feels good, gives a lot of front grip, gives me a lot of control over where to place the car on the track. So it's personal preference, and it's whatever feels best with that car. And then you obviously have competitions like the one I'm working on, where you have tire width restrictions to keep the playing field even. You have a tire to weight. Racers have to run a skinnier tire to make up for the weight that they don't have to carry around. Tire pressure, straightforward again. It's tire pressure. This game is in KPA. I have to translate it to PSI because I'm an American. So I don't understand. The KPA just doesn't register in my head, so I have to put it in PSI to have a understanding of what my tire pressure is at and what standard tire pressures are. Standard tire pressure in a car is 30 psi, which is 200 kPa. As you can see that I have the rear on this car. 26 is a pretty standard tire pressure that I see in drifting and stuff like that with standard road going street legal style cars, stuff like that, not your full pool comp cars. And it's also kind of a baseline tire pressure I see on games like Assetto and stuff like that. 26 psi is 179 kPa on this game. So just to give you an idea of that. Depending on what you're building the car for, you can run lower tire pressures. The front, the lower the tire pressure, the more the force feedback is going to increase. So the more feedback you're going to get through your wheel, might cause some oscillation, stuff like that. But you're also going to get more, one, tire rollover, and two, you're going to get more grip to a certain extent. Obviously, if you run it down, like at 5 psi, it's going to feel terrible because your tire is just going to be rolling under the wheel constantly, and it's going to feel kind of sloshy and sloppy and unresponsive. So you want to find that balance of keeping the front tire rigid, but not so rigid that it's just hard as a rock, and you're depending solely on the tread compound the adhesion of the tire to keep you glued to the ground. So I usually stay in between like 26 and 32 psi in the front, depending on what kind of car I'm building. This one's at 32 psi in the front, I think. My Mustang that I have for my competitions and stuff like that, I run the rear all the way down to 15, and then I have the front up at 28, because that's just what felt best to me. That 28 psi made my feedback really smooth, made my tire response really consistent. Adversely, the rear, that 15 psi, lets the tire squat, lets the sidewall squat down, gives me a theoretically wider contact patch because that tire is squatting down, so that tire is widening as it compresses, and then it's giving me some roll under as well, so it makes the rear of the car not so twitchy. So So, but the biggest thing is getting that grip out of that car. Um, Wheel adhesion, 4 different types of adhesion. I'm going to explain them really quick. Your 90 adhesion is your standard worn down throwaway burner tire that you're just going to get a couple laps out of. They represent it pretty cool on this game with showing a kind of worn down tire, showing some of the cords and stuff like that. 100 adhesion is going to be your standard kind of all season performance tire. It's going to be higher in that tread wear range if you know what tread wear is in real life. It's going to be in that kind of like 500 plus range. It's going to be tires that you're going to throw on your car that you drive every day. It's going to be something like a trying to think of a tire that I can relate it to. Oh man, I'm struggling right now trying to think of something. Let's go with like a Continental True Contact. It's the first one that came to mind because that's what's on my wife's car. Like a Continental True Contact, all season tire, has bigger valleys for water dispersion. Makes the tire as ideal as possible to drive in all seasons, all weather. Has a different compound makeup, so it doesn't get super hard when the tire gets cold, stuff like that. So that's what a 100 adhesion is your standard, all season tire. The grip's going to be consistent, but it's not going to be, like through the roof. 100 adhesion, or 110 adhesion, I'm sorry, is going to be dropping down on that tread wear rating. It's going to give you a little bit more grip. Is when you're going like sub 400, sub 500, but you're still, up above like wear. That's going to be something like your Achilles ATR Sport 2 or your Nankang NS20s, stuff like that. Then your 120 adhesion is going to be the tires that you see in like Formula D Pro 1 and D1 GP and Drift Masters and stuff like that. That's going to be these lower tread wear, like sub 250 tread wear tires. They're really soft, they're really grippy, they wear out really fast. They don't have a lot of grooving in them because they are trying to put just as much rubber to the ground as possible for grip. So keep that in mind. A lot of comps like the one I'm helping with, it's run on 120s. I prefer 120s because of just how they feel. They're really consistent, they're grippy, they're responsive. Some people prefer 100s or 110s. It's personal preference for what you like to drive all the time. Keep in mind there might be instances where you have to use a certain compound for a competition. Your wheel track is just how far your wheels move in and out from your car. As you increase the number, positive, the further out they move. From what I can tell, they don't make a difference on the physics yet, so it's not something that's really important. It's more aesthetic. In real life, without going to extremes, as you increase your wheel track, you're going to increase grip, and stability. But if you go too far away, you're going to be moving away from your ideal steering axis inclination, which is pretty much the drawing a line straight down. If you're looking at the front of your car, you draw a line straight down through your shock, and you draw a line straight down through the middle of the tire. Those two lines should meet together at the ground. So if they vary in and out from each other, you're losing ideal grip that you can get out of your car and out of your tire. So like I said, I haven't noticed that it makes a difference yet. That would be something that I would need CarX to kind of clarify if it does make a difference. It's not super noticeable, but it's also one of those things where we can't see the steering axis inclination, so be kind of hard to adjust for that, and it'd be something that you'd literally just have to play with as a separate setting once you get the car dialed in. Tire profile, this is just how tall the sidewall is. In CarX terms, a lot of comps restrict to 30% or higher. 30% is pretty ideal. It's a pretty good baseline to kind of stay around. As you go taller in your tire, it's going to make your feedback smoother, but it's going to make it more sloppy as well. You're not going to get that same kind of rigid, responsive tire like I was talking about before. So, and then this is also the way that you're going to adjust the overall diameter if you have a competition where you have a diameter restriction, like the one I'm working on. Um, you're going to have to play with that tire profile and the tire width that you can go up to. Because as when you're at 30% and you have a 215 at 30%, and then you have a 265 at 30%, that 265 is going to be taller as well because it's 30% of the width. So if you have it at 30% and you increase your width, your height's going to increase as well. So there's tire calculators online that are really cool that tell you what the overall diameter and stuff is as you put on a certain tire size. So use that if you want to. Excuse me. The engine stuff is pretty straightforward. It's kind of all personal preference and what you're building the car to do. If you're building a street car, if you're building a OE representation car, if you're building a low power kick around car to practice with, or if you're building a competition car, something like this. I've kept it pretty realistic. I have a lot of high-end torque because of the turbo setup that I have on my real S13. I have my limiter at 7,200 RPMs. I have it turned down a little bit on this game. My real car makes about 420 to the wheels. It's obviously going to get turned down to about 10 psi, so I'm hoping to get it, around 350, somewhere around there, just so I can get, a little bit more throttle response, a better spool, things like that. But yeah, engine tune-up stuff. It's going to be what you're building the car for. Transmission. Talk about the diff lock ratio real quick. This is how much the outside and inside wheel, it's how much difference in rotation there is under acceleration and deceleration. A two-way differential is when they share the same locking percentage or the same clutch packs, and they're going to be using them at the same amount when the clutch packs lock together. Two-way diffs is what you're going to see in drifting because you want consistency out of acceleration and deacceleration with your differential locking. Locking that inside tire or locking the slower tire to the faster tire. There's different increments that you're going to see with two-way differentials as far as clutch pack setups. You're usually going to see 30%, 60%, 90%. Is kind of your increments that you're going to see locking percentage in. For drifting, most people are going to run the most amount of friction surfaces possible with their clutch packs, which is 90%. You can't have 100%. It's not possible. There's going to be some slippage in the clutch discs in the differential. So 90% is a standard two-way limited slip differential setting for drifting. So it's what I usually recommend people run to get a proper representation of how a real two-way LSD is going to act when they're driving. You can go lower if you want to, but it's going to make your on throttle and off throttle reaction from your differential a little inconsistent, and it's going to lock a little slower, and it's going to let that slower tire slip more. So it's gonna make the rear of the car want to push straight versus rotating. So there's some people that do run like 0.6, 0.5 and stuff like that on here, but it's not something that I consider ideal. But again, it's personal preference. I just try and lead people down the road of tuning as realistically as possible. Transmission, your gear ratios, really quick way just to go over this. The lower the number, the longer it is. So your final drive is that's the gear in the rear end of your car. As you increase that number, it's gonna move towards acceleration, so it's gonna encourage your car to accelerate quicker because you're making that ratio of engine rotation to drivetrain rotation higher. So your car is it's gonna go through your gears quicker, it's gonna accelerate quicker, but you're not gonna have any top end. So it's finding a balance there. I usually try and take into account real life final drive ratios and kind of work around those. My real S13 has a I accidentally put on 411 by accident. Has a 410 Tomei two-way LSD in it. But depending on what I'm building the car for, and how much power it has and stuff like that, there's going to be different final drives that are going to be more ideal. With the gears, that's just going to be adjusting each individual gear. I have real SR20 gear ratios on this because I'm trying, again, replicating my car. The lower the number, the lower the number, the longer the gear. It's just the mindset that you want to stay in as you're tuning your gears. 1.0 is a 1-to-1 ratio, which means that your engine RPM is 100% equal to the rotation of your wheels at the ground. So your 1-to-1 gear, I usually try and make that my gear that I stay in, especially when I'm building comp cars and stuff like that, because you're going to get the most predictability as far as what rev range you're in with the engine. You're going to know exactly the amount of rotations that you're getting out of those wheels, and you're also going to be getting more forward bite out of the car the lower that ratio is. So like my Mustang, I think there's some places where I might run it in fifth gear, and my fifth gear in that car is like a 0.85, and it's gonna accelerate like a bat out of hell because I have a higher final drive to make up for that. And that's what I'm trying to get out of that car, is as much grip and acceleration as possible. Brakes, your brake torque, really straightforward. It's just how much pressure your brakes have in relation to the pedal depression. So the higher the brake torque means the less you have to press your brake pedal to get more engagement out of your brakes. So find a balance with that. You don't want them to lock up too quick, but you want to still have some pressure to be able to lock your brakes up if you need to, or to just be able to lay into the brakes to slow down in a situation that might call for it, like somebody spinning in front of you or decelerating too fast or something like that. Brake bias is the difference in brake pressure going from the front of the car to the rear of the car. So 50% is 50-50. That means that the brake torque is split exactly 50% to the front, 50% to the rear. As you increase this, it's going to increase your pressure to the front versus the rear. You want to keep in mind that as you brake, your weight is going to unload in the rear, load in the front. So your front tires are going to be encouraged to lock up faster the more bias you have towards the front, with the weight being added onto them as well. Obviously that plays into the whole how much suspension travel you have and how much weight you're letting shift on the car and stuff like that. So I've started running around like 60% bias. It feels really good. It lets me left foot brake really easy behind people. It doesn't bog the rear of the car down to where I'm losing speed, but it's not, just pulling the front end in and, the rear of the car just whipping around and rotating. So there's a balance with that. ABS is analog braking. I keep it turned off because I want to be able to lock my brakes up if I need to. And then launch control for the tandem battles, you can turn it on or off. Totally up to you. So there's all that. I managed to keep this exactly at an hour almost, and I'm really proud of myself. I'm going to cut the stream here in a minute. I'm going to go do a couple things around the house. I'm going to come back. I might start another stream back up. I might try my hand at Warzone. I've only played it like 3 times my entire life, but might do it for some content. So I might try my hand at Warzone. I might try and play the new Rebirth Island or something like that for you guys. Try and delve into some different content here. And then hopefully I'll be streaming later today with some of my teammates and buddies and stuff like that, and we'll give you some good CarX content as well. practicing for the competition that I'm helping with, that I've mentioned for like the fourth time now. Sorry about that. So give you guys some content with that as well. Hopefully get some really nasty tandems running through that section and stuff like that, getting some practice in, making sure that the cars are balanced out right and stuff like that. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I totally don't mind. I love helping people. That's the whole reason I'm doing this, is to help people. Knowledge is pointless if you don't share it with the world. So that's what I'm here to do. I have knowledge in something, so I want to share it with people. And I want people to be able to build cars on CarX or on Forza or whatever and know what they're doing and be able to reach the potential out of these cars as much as they can, like I try to do. And just having the basic knowledge and stuff like this with cars and things like that is just something that you can take into real life as well. And it's something that isn't very common anymore, sadly. There's not a lot of mechanics left, with how underpaid they are and stuff like that. And I know a lot of mechanical friends get taken advantage of with helping people and stuff like that. So I mean, it's not an ideal profession to get into now, and it's not common to see anymore. I'm not I don't work in automotive mechanics anymore myself because there wasn't enough payout for it. And life called for me to make more money, so I went a different path. And sadly I didn't enjoy just doing basic maintenance and stuff on cars anymore. I like doing aftermarket stuff. I like building on my real cars and stuff like that. And if I could get into a performance shop and stuff like that, and start helping people set up aftermarket suspensions and getting custom alignments and setting up cars for drifting and racing and stuff like that, love to do that. I get straight back into doing mechanical work again, but not a thing right now. So we'll see what happens. We'll see where life takes me. But again, reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm around all the time. I have Discord, I have Messenger on Facebook. You can tag me in a post in the CarX Wheel community. If you have a question for me, you can reach out to me on here. You can shoot me a message when you find my gamer tag. And just, whatever question you have, I'll answer it the best I can. I'll help you get your car set up. I'll work with you as far as, what you do and don't want out of the car in regards to your driving habits and your driving styles and stuff like that, and I'll help you get a car set up the best that I can for you. And, explain things as best as I can as well, to a point where you understand them, and you can take that and you can share that knowledge with somebody else when they ask you. So like I said, I'll be back in a little bit. I appreciate everyone that's watched. I appreciate the follow. I just noticed that new follow. I appreciate that a lot. I'm up to 20 followers now. Honestly, didn't think I'd ever be doing something like this, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. I know I'm not some big tens of thousands of viewer Twitch streamer, but I'm here for the people that want to watch and the people that want to learn, and the people that enjoy CarX and stuff like that. I'll have a wheel cam soon as well, hopefully at some point. They're kind of sought after right now with COVID and everything, and people working from home and doing schooling from home and stuff like that, so they're kind of hard to find. But I'll have a wheel cam for you guys as well at some point for when I'm on CarX, hopefully. So again, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in a little bit. I'm going to be saving this and hopefully uploading it to YouTube so it doesn't disappear into the nether realms of Twitch this time. Again, my gamer tag is TTL Kooky. You'll see it at the bottom of the stream there. And then on Facebook, if you want to look up Team Topline, I'm the co-leader for them. We encompass everything from Assetto Corsa to CarX to Forza, and we've been trying to upload content as much as possible, but with the holidays and stuff like that, we haven't been around as much. I know a few of us have streamed a few times, but we're going to try and get back into uploading some content and some clips and stuff for you guys as much as we can. And then if you are on CarX and you are on a wheel and you don't know about us yet, or you are interested in playing on a wheel and stuff like that, please look up CarX Wheel Community on Facebook. Join up. Please answer the questions so that we can accept your join to the group, because we've had to kind of harshing down on, declining join requests and stuff like that if people don't answer the questions and things like that from some issues that have happened with certain people that aren't in the group anymore. So please answer the questions. Be as detailed as you can. Join the group, and we'll help you get set up, help you get tuned up. And again, appreciate everybody for watching, and I will be back in a little bit.